victory around the dress code. We no longer have to only wear dresses, but the colonial status continues. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here. It's such a treat to hear Carlos Parada first, to know of his work for many years, but to see it in action here is really an honor and a treat. I'll tell you a little bit about our schedule here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Teaching for Change, what we do both locally and nationally. We'll do a little lesson looking at Central America, particularly an important region that often gets skipped over, in the curriculum. And then we'll take a deeper dive into children's literature, something I know I've already been looking at some of the books in the back, and we know that no matter what grade you're teaching, children's initial ideas about the world are often shaped by what they see or don't see in children's books. Time for discussion, and then let's give you a short evaluation. Before we get started, I'm hoping, how many people know other people here? A lot of people most of you know each other, most people here, so many people. Well, if we just take a minute to turn to someone that you don't know, find someone you don't know, and also when we want to come back, I'm going to do a variation of what Carlos did. Carlos said 3 claps. I had the honor to do a workshop in Puerto Rico, and they add a waterfall. So it was clap, clap, and then shh. So I'm going to ask you to turn to someone you don't know and say something wonderful that happened in your classroom or your teaching last week. One thing that you want to share from your teaching last week. Teaching for Change is a nonprofit organization. We're based in DC. Our work is both regional and national, and we're approaching our 30-year anniversary. Our focus is really helping students uncover the truth about history and their role so they can be informed and active citizens, very much like you heard about in the first session. And we do that through 3 primary functions. One is through publications, a couple were mentioned in the introduction, professional development workshops, and in the DC we have a parent organizing project. We also coordinate something called the Zinn Education Project that has lessons online for teaching people's history. Most are for middle and high school, or there's some for upper elementary. And they cover the span of U.S. history. They're organized by theme and time period. They can be downloaded for free. And what's encouraging to know in these times particularly is that to date, 95,000 teachers have signed up to download lessons, and we get about 60 more every day from all over the country. We have at least 5 of the lessons now translated and available in Spanish so that you can use the lessons in Spanish. And I will send that particular link afterwards. And we have a couple of campaigns we're organizing. One is to teach about Reconstruction, and the other is to teach about climate justice. It's, as you probably saw from the NPR study this spring, one of the greatest crises we're all facing, and yet one of the most under-taught subjects, and could be taught in every subject area. So I'll also share some of those resources. We have another emphasis is around children's books, and so we have a website called Social Justice Books where we critique and organize reviews of books by theme. And this card, that if you didn't pick one up, you can pick it up as you grab your lunch. There's some there next to the water. This image that was produced by Sarah Park Dalen and David Hike sort of really encapsulates why we do this work. If you look at it, who can see themselves most represented in children's books? What kind of children? White children. And you can see the graphic is so powerful because he can see himself in the disco ball and the mirrors on the ceiling and in all sorts of representations. And then the next largest group of children's books are about and if you add up all the other groups, do they exceed the percentage of animals?
No.
And then it gets worse, because if we get to say the books about African Americans, out of that 10%, probably half of them are about which 3 people? Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Sojourner Truth, or Harriet Tubman. There's just a very limited number of people that those books become about. The same thing when we get to Latinx books are about, who would they be about? Cesar Chavez. Yep. maybe, they think they're getting really, going out there, Dolores Huerta and Sonia Sotomayor, then it's diversifying. And we run into this with publishers. There's literally a children's book about Sarah Louise Keyes, who had refused to move on the bus. She was in the reserves and was serving in the reserves in the north, and when she went south to visit her family, she was in her uniform and they told her to move to the back of the bus, and she refused, and she was arrested. This was 10 years before Rosa Parks. And the publishers, when the author who was writing a book about her, the publisher said no. They said for two reasons. One, some publishers said we already have a book about Rosa Parks, we don't need this. And other people said, well, no one's going to know who she is, so they're not going to buy the book. So the author, in that case, self-published the book, has given the proceeds to Sarah Keyes, who's still alive, but it means that it doesn't have the visibility that a published book would. We'll come back to children's books later in the session. And in the DC area, we coordinate something called DC Area Educators for Social Justice. When we send a follow-up link, I encourage you all to sign up. We do a lot of events and activities. In the DC area, we just help coordinate Teach Central America Week, the first ever. And we have at least two of our advisors here. Dr. Ana Patricia Rodriguez was one of the advisors for the week. And we also have Ingrid Colon here. And then many people who participated. Carlos's school participated. Anyone else participate in it or hear about it? And next year, you'll be the leaders of the second annual. And this is our campaign of focusing on Central America, which will be the first thing that we'll do here. That's a little overview of Teaching for Change. We'll send you many more links and things to learn more afterwards. So for the session today, we're going to dive deeper into Central America and then children's books, if that's okay. So these resources that we're going to talk about are all, this is another website we have on teaching about Central America. All the lessons and resources can be downloaded for free. So we just finished the week, as I mentioned. And I'll first want to start off asking, how many people here have family from Central America, or are from Central America themselves? Great. How many people have traveled to Central America? And how many people work in a school with students and are co-workers from Central America? About everybody. Now this session might be a little different when we ask these questions. We are in many schools where we ask, how many people can you name from Central America? In schools where there are a large number of Central American students. And invariably we just get 2 or 3 hands up, and usually the first person that people say is Cesar Chavez. Yes, Latino, but not Central American. How many, but I think here with more people from the region, how many people here, any suggestions, how many people could you name? If you were just to think for yourself right now, how many people could you name from the region?
Nicolás Guillén, Rodrigo Bertamenchú.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So how many people, as you thought to yourself, could name at least 3 people from Central America? How many people could name 5 or 10?
5 or 10 people from Central America.
So in general, if we know that we have so many children from Central America coming to our classrooms, and we teach poetry, we teach math, we teach science, we teach geography, we teach about sports. If we don't know the people who populate all of those subject areas, we can't incorporate them into the curriculum, and therefore young people, whether consciously or subconsciously, get the impression that their heritage has no academic value, that where their families come has not contributed to the world in a serious academic way. And so what we're going to do, the wonderful thing is that oftentimes people say, but we're already overloaded, we don't have time to become the scholars on that topic. Thankfully, there are ways that we can learn a lot in a very short amount of time and then start incorporating that, and then our students can learn more and add more. So as someone mentioned, seeing this slide here, watching the next slide here, there are a few people that someone already mentioned. I think we've got Chico in the family, we've got Oscar Romero, Rodrigo Bertamenchú, there are many folks. And then also it's important to know the countries as well. But what we're going to do is, I'm going to guarantee you this is going to be magic. In about 20 minutes, you're all going to know at least 5 people, if not more. And so actually our colleagues here are going to pass out lanyards and bios. And when you get your lanyard and bio, go ahead and put on the lanyard. The bio is in the back, so take out the bio, start reading it, and you can underline it. The bio is yours to keep. We will collect the lanyards at the end. And then we're going to pretend we're at a conference, and you're going to be all meeting and interviewing and learning about other people. With this activity, I should mention that some of the people are not from Central America. Some of the people are from the United States who have had an impact on Central America, whether some positive, some negative. So it's also a way very quickly to learn about the relationship between the U.S. and the region. As there, take a few minutes to read your role, highlight or underline information, because once we start doing the activity, you will be in first person in your role, so you want to get a sense of who you are. And then you can take a look, there are some questions at your table, a sheet of questions. Take a look and see how you might answer the questions about yourself, because people will be asking you those questions. Rules, and we do this mixer. And you'll want to do this with your students, and you can do, how many people have done mixers like this, where everybody takes on a role? Yeah, so you can do various, there's, when the film Selma came out, we had some teachers who created a role play with that, and it was really wonderful, because then when students went to see the film, like halfway through, they were like, there's me, that's me, and they had that understanding. And the students who didn't see themselves started to wonder, like, why was that the filmmaker couldn't get everybody in, or was it a political decision? So it really got them thinking about which characters were there or were not. We have one that we did right after the election called Resistance 101, that's all people who have resisted throughout U.S. history, because we got the sense that students that were left thinking the only thing you could do is a walkout, or have a big leader give speeches, and so it's important to learn from history all the ways you can organize. With a lesson like this, after you're finished, students could then think about who are some other, there's contemporary Central American poets and musicians, or people in politics that they could add roles, and they could have like criteria for adding them. Or rewrite them. You might not agree with the slant in one of the roles that's here. But for a key important guideline for any of these, one is that you do need to do this in person. You can't be saying, well, my person is Somoza. You have to be in role. And you can't say, if someone comes up and asks me a question, I can't say, well, just read it, it's here. You need to be, in first person. And the other thing we say to students is, you're talking about your role, but you're not mimicking, that you don't imagine what an accent might be, or slang or type of speech, that we're not doing we're using our own voice as we speak. And then a couple other things is that, another teacher who does this, he said, it's not the Twilight Zone. If you come across someone else who is yourself, because we've got more than the amount of roles, you can't interview yourself. Go on and find the next person. And the other thing is for your students is that it's not a race. It's more important to have these conversations and learn about the people than it is to fill the sheet. And you can skip around on the sheet. Just don't just, if you find someone who can answer one of your other questions. Does that make sense? And the other rule is that we do need, we like to get up and move around. Don't just sit at your table and interview people there. So I'm going to ask if there's no questions. We're all ready? Okay, so we're going to ask everyone to stand up so you can go around and start interviewing each other. Everyone, yes, we have one question here. Just introduce yourself too.
I'm Norma.
Hi.
Hi. And I was just wondering, because I didn't get to talk to everybody about men and women with all within the activity.
The balance, the number? I can't remember now the exact number, but I know when we were working on it, we were pretty intentional about making sure that there was a good balance. We also these are always constantly works in progress, and more recently with the climate crisis contributing to people having to leave, we had a couple people. We had Bertha Cáceres. Who was Bertha Cáceres?
Sorry, no, I wasn't really excited because I'm taking a lesson about it.
Yeah, well, in her memory, she would be honored that this. But yeah, so it's important to give her voice. We had a couple people talking about the climate, so that was something we had not had before. We would like to include more Afro-Latino representation, and that's been focusing on El Salvador originally with being where the Gladys work started. We did not have as many Afro-Latinos, and we work to include that more. Any other, before sort of, it's not like you're stepping out of the role now thinking about as teachers, anything else that just as teachers you thought we should either add or change, or that you would change if you were to use it? Yes?
How many people from the group that we have so far are still alive?
That's a good question, because it's actually, we've had to update, sadly, we've had to update Robert White, who passed away not long ago. We've had to update it. Claribela Alegria died since we produced this, so I would have to go back and check.
Because I was in a conference a couple of weeks ago in Williamsburg, and we had the opportunity to talk and see Shelba Velasco, and that was wonderful because that was my first time that I know about her, and then suddenly she became my friend in Facebook. So.
Well, if you think of people we should add, or even want to write a bio and get us a picture, that it's always helpful. I mean, that's the beauty of this being on the internet, is that we can do that, right? We can add bios, and again, you can have your students, if there's a community activist in their community that they would like to add, there's people, yes.
I just want to say that this is an excellent example of the idea of taking perspective, which is one of the things you move to deepen your understanding about something. So thank you for the exercise.
Yeah, and some of them are hard. Some people had probably a hard time with perspective, right? We had here the Dulles brothers, and we had some. And then, yes.
The person I had,
And you can speak up for older folks here.
Roberto Clemente, puertorriqueño.
Sí.
It was very interesting. Growing up in the United States, we don't learn what he did,
Right.
how he died.
Right.
Not really, it's not a common narrative. So he died taking aid. So it's so important for our students to learn this narrative, because this shows more about him than just his profession.
Right.
So that is something that, yes. it can be
Right, and everybody knows the story of Roberto Clemente.
I'd like to add something to that too. I'm Puerto Rican. So anyways, and there's many schools, I'm talking about nationwide, in different states, that they have Roberto Clemente's name in schools.
You're right. And there's also children's books, which this gets into. If you're looking at the children's books will now mention, that he was doing this sort of charity, right, of taking this aid. But I've yet to see a children's book that says he didn't have to do that. If this country had been sending aid to the people rather than arms to Somoza, he wouldn't have risked his life. He went on he knew that plane was heavily overloaded. And from what I've heard, he was even scared of flying. So it was not his first choice to make that flight, but he'd been told the only way that these donations were going to reach the people was with the only person that could really block the National Guard from blocking that delivery would be if he was on that plane.
December 31st.
I was talking to her exactly about something extra to do with this activity, and I mentioned to her that we could have a luggage full of props that related at least one from each one of the person, and give the student the first time without the picture.
Right.
Pick one that you will like the most or identify yourself, and then try to match that with the person that belong to. So that will be another activity to connect who I am and who I could be related, regardless that we are from different countries.
Right, so baseball, you wouldn't know, why would that be part of this, and then you find out.
Yeah.
Right, and if you do that, write it up, let us know. Yeah, how many people can now name at least 3 people from Central America? Right, probably everybody, right? So it doesn't take, when they say that, we can go deeper and deepen our knowledge in a relatively short amount of time. I think also for students, most of them will go back and start Googling, right? Find out more about who they were. These are questions you could use if you're debriefing with your students. You can also then create a timeline or diagrams and look at what was the relationship with the United States to Central America. What did anybody here find out? What did you learn from your role?
So I was president of Guatemala, Jacobo Guzman. And I actually was just Googling him a little more, so proving you right. Because of just the way that this is written, there is a slant to it, so I was curious to see some more information. So he was trying to expropriate lands from the United Fruit Company and the U.S. government. Then, because of their investment in the bananas in Guatemala, they decided to overthrow him since they saw him also as a communist, and then also the money was involved. And right after that is when Guatemala, a new president was put in. That's when Guatemala experienced widespread violence. So,
and ever since, really. And I think what's important for students to know, particularly because everybody studies the McCarthy era, but we don't really learn about, it almost seems like it's an aberration, like people treat the current president as an aberration rather than really part of a trajectory. And so I would say that it's not clear that they thought he was a communist. It was useful to label him as a communist because he was talking about paying the United Fruit Company the very value that they had declared when they paid taxes to Guatemala for that land. So it's not like he was talking about stealing it from them. And I think Allende did the same thing, right, with the copper. It's like, this is the value you've been telling all along that you're going to pay us for this land, so this is what we're going to pay you now for it, because that's what you said it was worth. But it was that very act of that they were no longer going to be able to steal those profits out of Guatemala. And that's where you get the Dulles brothers and the CIA. And that is very well documented and is a very useful story because it's very clear. Sometimes the people we need to support are a little more difficult to support. I mean, I think without bans, it's a very clear case of how that would have benefited the people and how it was really profit over people in a very tragic way. We have a couple more comments and then we want to move on to looking at the books. Yeah.
So I was Oliver North, so I was
yeah. So as soon as I got the picture, I was like, okay, it's gonna be interesting, of course. It's from the military, so obviously I know that most military people have some influence in the Central American conflict. So I was really surprised when I read his bio, because I did not know about him, surprisingly enough. And it was intense, and I remember that everybody that I talked to, I would explain what I was doing, like, there's more, and I'm like, yes, there's more. I did so much stuff, and I would keep, telling them, and it was really, some horrible stuff.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting because the people that I talked to most of them were communist people. So when we were talking, they were like, oh, I don't think I'm gonna like you. Oh, okay. And it was really fun to do that, like have that role playing with another person where we were like literally those people. And we were having this conversation, just joking, I don't think I'm gonna like you.
Right, so you can imagine students get into that.
Yeah.
And I think everybody knows, right, he was more recently head of the NRA. Like these people keep getting revived and resuscitated. And again, a lack of a historical lens leads, that if we don't know his history, there's not the widespread protest. We have a couple more comments in the background when I look at children's books. Anybody? Yeah.
I wanted to mention that as I wrap up to the activity, we could ask them which words they can see as repeated. Okay, so I said, as an example, rights is one of the words that I see repeated in the stories we have in common. And then from that, revolution, socialism, and indigenous land. So those are aspects that are on the table in those countries. And as an extension in Latin America, in South America. And that could be used as a wrap-up activity, and in a way that helps us or helps them to understand why there are so many fights all over the place. Okay? And another thing I wanted to point out was that this is like living history. I was Cardenal Quintero, Cartman.
Ernesto Cartman.
I was, yes, I have it in my hand. Ernesto Cartman. And as I was reading and I was talking, I could input more information of what I read while I was remembering my teenage years, reading and studying history. And everything was coming to my mind, so I could give more information than I had here. So it is a very good activity.
Good, thank you. Which is really powerful also here in a school where it has fewer Central American students, that they become the experts, that have more knowledge that they could bring as a background. Yeah.
And also if you have lived in any of those countries, that moves you.
Yeah.
And from Venezuela and reading this has moved many things and
Okay, we're going to try to keep it, but I do want to have time to look at the books. I think Carlos, did you? I do want to note too that I think it's important, and I think probably goes without saying here, but so many times, if there's only a few students from a certain area, the teacher will expect that student to be, to inform everyone else, as if that student's had a chance to learn their own history. And so we have found doing this lesson in classrooms with Central American students at Capital City Public Charter or at Roosevelt High School, the kids are so excited to learn and then go back and have conversations with their families that oftentimes the families weren't ready to have with them before. So it does help take the onus or the expectation off, because I grew up in the U.S., I didn't learn any U.S. history really, so it wouldn't be fair to expect that anyone's going to learn that history's been denied. But I love the land question. I think that's actually one we should add, a sort of, if you were to, a debrief could be, what did you learn about the role of land? Because that's where Arbenz was trying to keep the land for the Guatemalans, the whole issue of land is big. This is an abbreviated version. If you were doing it with your students, you would obviously spend more time. You could do all the other sort of wraparound things people talked about here, but I want to be sure we have time to look at children's books, so I'm going to move us on. And I'll talk to you a little bit about the books before you look at the books you have. And I will send resources. There are more resources related to the campaign. I'm sure people are familiar with the film Harvest of Empire, The Golden Dream, Jaula de Oro. And there's a website with interviews with young people on the war in Central America 20 years ago, and following up with them today. But another area where people can learn, so the role play is one way, the other issue is places children's books about Central America and Latino, Latinx heritage in general. And we're going to have some time to look at books, because often as teachers we don't get time to sit and look at books. But first, some considerations. And one of the things that these are a number of things we look at, and you would probably add more to the list. One is whose voices are written in, and this is where it's important to be specific, because even though the author might be Latino, if they're not from that country, there are still many things that could be left out. There's a children's book about Chile that's gotten great reviews. The author is Latina, but she's not Chilean. And she had made literally no mention of the U.S. role in the overthrow of Allende, even though it's a story about a young person who has to leave Chile because her family's being threatened. But to leave out the U.S. role was just unconscionable, and I think if it had been a Chilean author, that would have been different. Grassroots versus individual heroes, we talked about that a little bit before, but so many books will just highlight Dr. King, Rosa Parks, Cesar Chavez, as if they operated, up on high, and it's what's allowed the media now to then, now with the environmental justice movement, it's as if Greta is, Thunberg, as wonderful as she is the first person to ever think of, protesting the climate. And so it's important to always say, what is the role of quote unquote ordinary people or more people in the movement? Specificity, it's important that at least some of the books name specific countries. There's a children's book. The publishers don't like to do that. They like to be generic. There's a children's book you might have seen, because Africa is another area where they do this. It's called I Lost My Tooth in Africa. The book was written as I Lost My Tooth in Mali. The publisher refused to publish it as I Lost My Tooth in Mali, and insisted that it be I Lost My Tooth in Africa. Because they said no one's going to know where Mali is. Yes, here we go. Diversity, this is particularly, important when we get to looking at Latin America, with the US, with many regions, that there be Afro-Latinos, Asian Latinos, people who speak indigenous languages, that the diversity be represented, and that's sadly all too rare. The social change, we look for books that, even if it's a book about social change, all too often we see that everything ended, happily, there was a happy ending and a victory as if the movement ended, and it's important for young people to know it's an ongoing struggle. The root causes, as we mentioned earlier, we just see this over and over again, that it's people fleeing some region as if, and it reinforces that stereotype, there's something wrong with that country, that people just can't govern themselves, they're always fighting, rather than understanding the US role. And this is even sadly among some progressive authors, so I think we need to be writing to them and talking to them about that you can do it in an age-appropriate way. It doesn't have to be, a whole, what do you call it, like a lot of heavy rhetoric, but it can be mentioned, the US role. And it's important to mention it. And then the stereotype, so one stereotype being that these countries are just always having problems, and that the lifelong dream of anyone is to come to the US. People are just born in the rest of the world wanting to come to the US, rather than being the last resort in such a difficult decision. And there are other stereotypes. One is around portraying black as bad, and that we just see that over and over, and I'm going to show you just a few examples. This is a wonderful children's book about immigration and a child fleeing a war-torn area, and you can see in the picture to the left that the war was represented with grayness, but then when they represented the child drawing that in their memory, they literally represent it as blackness and say that have the child saying, "I ran to escape the blackness." We've written to the publisher about that one, they've not changed it. Another one is one of our favorite books, and that's about immigration, Island Born by Junot Diaz. You guys got copies here. One of the very few children's books about immigration. This is immigration from the DR that actually has the child asking about positive memories of the DR and people sharing so many positive memories. And then she's asking, so then why did people leave if it's such an amazing place? And she gets told about this monster and that people resisted the monster. And so it really does talk about the push factors and the fact that it was a very difficult decision to leave. And throughout the book, if you get a chance to have that be one of the ones you could look at, there are bats, and the bats are pink and green and yellow and orange, all different colors of bats, except when you get to the monster, who's Trujillo, and guess what color they made Trujillo? Go see it, yeah. Where'd it go here? Oh, there we go, okay. They made him black. So again, one more time, the message for children, even in a book that otherwise affirms the children throughout are as brown as Lola here. It's a beautiful book, but one more time, they reduce bad to being black. In this case, we did write to Junot Diaz and the publisher, and thankfully they disposed of all the books they had printed, and they reissued it. We suggested he be orange, but they made him pink. But at least it's a change. At least it's not black. And so now when you cannot purchase the books that you purchase now, the monster is green. There are other examples. This was I don't know if you can see with the lighting here, the original cover of Harriet Tubman. This is the flip, the goodness is being white. Harriet Tubman, a hero. The original cover for that to the left had her looking just about as white as I am. And so the author in this case thankfully saw it and protested, and they changed her to be more representative of her actual skin color. Yeah, the children as well. They were all white. Because this was goodness, right? Harriet Tubman, our hero. And I had another one I thought here. Where did it? Let me see. No, let's see. There's other examples I can send you that it's an ongoing struggle. There's another one where there's a little girl in a bad mood, and she's hitting the bad mood that's above her head, and the bad mood is a black cloud with eyes. And so then we protested, and they changed that one. So it is an ongoing issue to look at. There are many things to look at in children's books. But what we want to do is have you have a little time to look at children's books yourself. So everybody's picked up a book. I'm gonna there's some information sheets or some other questions that you might want to consider. I'll put those at your table, and you can take a look at those. But think as you're looking through the book, and let me just give one more set of instructions, and then we'll have time to read. In many cases, it's the collection of books. Like one book might be good on its own, but if every book is that same story, then you don't have the diversity. But right now, just look at the book you have and think about its qualities, whether it's a book you recommend or not, and then we'll have some time at your table to talk about them. Okay, but and I'm going to ask that you to give your peers a few minutes just to read quietly. Some of us can read with discussion going on, but some of us need to read quietly. So let's take about 3 to 5 minutes just to read quietly, and then we'll say it's open for discussion. I want to thank you for the work you're doing, and it's a real honor meeting everybody here. Look forward to staying in touch. And we've got instructions for lunch.
Yeah, we're having instructions for lunch.
Okay, get everybody's attention. One more time,
Qué
sorry.
rico que están así todo el mundo en la brega. Tenemos nuestro delicioso sándwich de almuerzo con unos juguitos y agua. Estamos en esa. Empezamos ahora a la 1 y aunque el programa dice que terminamos a la 1:45 y tenemos muchas ganas de hablarnos y todo, tal vez queremos hacer el almuerzo solamente hasta la 1:30, ¿sí? Comenzar el siguiente taller un poquito antes y entonces hacia el final tenemos más tiempo para discusiones y ver qué queremos hacer después. ¿Estamos? Pues provecho y un aplauso para